You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 94 of Making Tracks, brought to you by the fine folk over at fanfortracks.com. My name's Mark, I am one of your co-hosts, and this week, as always, I am joined by a man whose arms are probably more spindly than Omega's. It's Mr. Mark Newbold.
What are you trying to say, dude? Spindly? I mean, I'll say slender, I'll take slender, but spindly? I mean, really?
Wow. Just means you've got to get into the gym, stop pumping some iron, or use that bow flex type thing that she's using, because that's what basically it is, isn't it?
But I have actually been to the gym today, in my own defence.
Well
I was there bright and early, I was there at 6:30 this morning, so I have actually done some today. And
that's impressive, and not trying to one-up you, I was also at the gym. We're both pumped and ready to go.
Definitely pumped. Definitely pumped. Yes, can't argue with that.
Yeah, exactly. Those 5 kilogram dumbbells, didn't know what hit them this morning. Yeah, that's a fact. So
no, totally putting the dumb in dumbbells. Totally.
Exactly. Anyway, how are you? How's your week in Star Wars been?
It's been good. It's been a busy one. The site's ticking over nicely. We're now into June, of course, so that's a whole other month. We get closer to real. I'm doing the air quotes again. Great for podcasting. Boot on the ground events.
Yeah,
are not that far away now. You did a troop last week.
I did. Have you had any new acquisitions?
Not a huge amount this week. Oh, just to say, it was very cool to find out. I was told by Boba Fett fan club actually let me know that Charles Soule, who puts out a monthly newsletter, had taken a little snippet out of my review of War of the Bounty Hunters Alpha and put it into his newsletter,
nice.
Which was really, really cool.
Yeah.
And, Mark Newbold from Fantha Tracks, so it was nice to get the Fantha name out there, which was cool. Matt Booker at Automatic Comics has sent me early, because I usually get them when there's a bit of a bunch of comics. Mm-hmm. He sent them me early. I've got War of the Bounty Hunters issue 1 coming and a couple of other bits, just because I like to have them in hand. I'm sure you're the same. It's nice to have them in hand to review them rather than, trying to find stuff online and it's just a chore. How about you?
Obviously, the beginning of a month, so my comics came from Darkstar Comics in Cove. Yeah, I've got War of the Bounty Hunters and all that to read. 50th anniversary, Return of a Jedi, Star Wars Vintage Collection figures. So those 3 which we actually spoke about on the show a few weeks, maybe a couple of months back.
Yes.
Princess Leia, Poncho, Paplu, and what we considered the Richard Marquand ATST driver.
Yes.
And they look great. And also continuing my repurchasing of Power of the Force 2 Beast packs, I've picked up my Dewback and Stormtrooper pack with their Star Wars Special Edition logos on. That's the only ones I'm after, is the ones which have got the Special Edition logos, because I had those originally, and those very much remind me very much of the Special Edition 1997.
Well, I had another couple of bits turn up this week. I'll tell you the first one. £5 each from Paul Duncan's website. So the author Paul Duncan, who did the Star Wars archives, obviously the episodes 4 to 6, episodes 1 to 3 has recently come out. Absolutely gorgeous. And there was the facility through his website to purchase. They're basically postcards with the covers of the books on the front. Then on the back, he's personalised it. And so I'll just tell you what's on them. So the Star Wars Archives episodes 4 to 6, on the back he's put, "For Mark, may the Force be with you, PD." He's put a picture of the Death Star, and then he's put some X-Wings coming towards the Death Star. And then his signature includes what can only be described as Homer Simpson's head. It literally looks like Homer Simpson's head. I think it's wonderful. And then on the Archives 1 to 3, he put "For Mark" again. This is where the fun begins. And then what he's done is put Obi-Wan up, and he's put Anakin on like the platform from Revenge of the Sith with the high ground, and then PD, and then Homer Simpson's head once again. So if you're listening to this, Paul, which I sincerely hope you are, thank you very much. These are really, really cool. They're going to go with the books. And then the other thing that came through, which I'm really excited by, Bowmansgreen, who've been doing these retro look back, as we've been talking about them on the site for ages and here on the pod, back at the earliest days of the Star Wars run, post A New Hope, post Star Wars. They've now got to The Empire Strikes Back, the Palatoy, very important, Palatoy releases of the mini rigs. Now, if you remember in the UK, you get little flyers, little sort of A5 flyers, get your Rancor Keeper, the Emperor's coming, and all that sort of stuff. These little flyers that were tied into the release of figures. what he's done is replicate that essentially with the Empire Strikes Back mini rigs. So you've got PDT-8, MTV-7, INT-4, MLC-3 and Cap-2, which was always my favourite Bosk ship. They are gorgeous. Pack of 5, so there's 5 in the set, 50 quid. Cool. And they're lovely. Will you be getting these, Mark?
I will definitely be getting these. And the reason why is because most of my mini rigs are boxed. Some of those, in fact, are boxed and sealed, which is great, assuming that the contents is exactly what it says on the box.
True.
But they're kind of on quite a high shelf, and there's a little bit of space underneath the glass shelf. So I was thinking that would make a perfect accompaniment to kind of get those on, because they look beautiful. And I don't know why, but there is something about those mini rigs. I don't know if it's because they're not in the films or something, or just because they were really accessible. And I had the mini rigs when I was growing up, so I would have picked those up when I was probably about 5 or 6 from probably a next door neighbour. My particular favourite is the MTV-7. There's something about it because you can squash it down, and the artwork looks wonderful. So hopefully I will make my way over to Bowmansgreen and put in an order for those prints.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And fingers crossed we get to the Jedi ones, because there was, the Endor cycle, and obviously we had the catapult and the glider and AST-5 and all the other stuff that came out for Jedi. So fingers crossed there's a set for Jedi. But yes, these are absolutely gorgeous.
Hello, Bantha Drags. Bantha Drags. I screwed it up. Hi, Bantha Drags.
Yesterday, Saturday night, the 501st Legion running their 1138 celebrating 50 years of Lucasfilm event, which is, as we speak, believe it or not, still ongoing. And last night, during the segment where the Walking Wounded with Albin Johnson segment, Scott Richardson, Quiggold in The Force Awakens, was their guest, talking about all the challenges and hurdles and obstacles that being an amputee in Scott's case will cause you as somebody getting around in life and being a Star Wars fan, as some of the costumers are. And then a familiar face turns up on my TV screen as I'm watching it, and I'm thinking, what is my co-host doing on a live stream? Explain to me, Mark, what were you doing?
It wasn't just one familiar face, I think it was 2, because me and my good friend, and I guess you'd say my counterpart in the 501st UK Garrison, Gary Hales, we were basically asked by Albin to head over to Scott's house and surprise him on the live stream with a honorary membership induction to both the 501st and the Rebel Legion. It was a little bit short notice for us, and thankfully I was able to get in touch with Scott's wife, Suzanne, and she kind of organised it all and made sure that, we could get in without being noticed. And we kind of surprised the big fella on the stream. So it was pretty fun, because if he looked surprised on the stream, he looked doubly surprised in person, and it was such a really nice, positive guy, which hopefully we will get onto making tracks at some point and have a real in-depth chat with him about stuff, because he has had the most incredible life, not only because he's been in Star Wars The Force Awakens, but everything else about being an amputee and all the things that he does around that to support different charities and stuff. He runs marathons and that, so he's a remarkable guy. He signed some stuff for us, which was really nice, and obviously both me and Gary weren't expecting it, so he kind of signed a nice glossy 10x8 for me and personalised it. Signed some more for both clubs so we can then kind of raffle them off or auction them off later. But both him and his wife, they rescue battery hen chickens. When they get to the end of life, or the end of their use as a battery hens, normally I think they just get destroyed, which is quite sad. So people go along and kind of rescue them and look after them and give them like a second life. And so we got a set each, so half a dozen eggs from Quiggold. And he kind of signed the egg box, which at the time I said to him, oh yeah, could you sign the eggs? That'd be really funny. And he actually did sign the egg box. So he kind of said, use a yolk, Luke. And then he kind of signed it as, Scott Richardson and stuff. So yes, which I myself kind of tucked into one just before I went to the gym. And compared to normal kind of supermarket eggs, these things have nothing on them. They were so tasty, and the yolk was like a beautiful golden yellow.
I'm picturing you just cracking 6 raw eggs into a pint glass and necking it back. I'm assuming, because being a gym bunny as you are, I'm assuming that's what you did.
Oh yeah, totally. That's exactly what I did. All 6, in one go, just down the hatch.
Yeah,
sorted. Yeah. Then I went and did some deadlifts. Yeah.
Of course. Me and Matt were watching it, and we were dipping into bits and bobs of it, and it was really, really good. So obviously it's in the past now as you listen to this, but if you get a chance, go back. We put a few links on Fantha, link to this article about Scott's inductions, plural, which is very, very cool. The 501st are trying to raise money for First. Their aim is $15,000. They're well on their way. So if you get the chance, go over there, chuck a few credits their way. It's all helpful. No, it was very cool to see you on there, mate. Very cool.
Yeah, it was a really nice, fun way to spend the evening. And the great thing was I didn't have to drive because I met Gary and then he chauffeured me to their location and chauffeured me back. So that's amazing.
I'm Gareth Edwards, and you're listening to Making Tracks on Fantha Tracks Radio.
Issue 1 of War of the Bounty Hunters has arrived. It arrived last Wednesday. Continuing, really, the issues that have come out so far are sort of been a prelude to it, but this really gets the ball rolling. Speaking to comicbook.com, Emilia Clarke was asked the question about how she felt about Qi'ra and her surprise return at the very end of that first issue. And I'll read the quote that she said because it's very cool and it's very specific as well. She says, "It means so much, it means the absolute world. I know her backstory. I know her history. Maybe the movie didn't get to go there, but that was such an honour and a privilege to be a part of that universe as an actor. So then to see the character actually be taken on to the origins of all of it, bringing it on home to the family in that way, cemented it in a way. I was not expecting to feel as moved as I was by that." So clearly Emilia knows way more about the origins of Qi'ra and possibly where she would move on to, because I think the plan would have been, as it is with most films, that we're going to do Han Solo 2 and Han Solo 3 and make it a trilogy, which of course never happened, but fingers crossed may do one day on Disney+. What did you think of this? I thought it was really sweet that she was so interested in the fact that that character has returned in this this major comic storyline.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I really like it when actors feel invested in their character and know about it. And actually, sometimes we get that quite often with some Star Wars actors and stuff, especially from the original trilogy. There are actors who have been on the signing circuit for years who know as much about their characters as most fans, which is amazing. And I think it's great because it kind of then also shows that it's not just a job for them. You know, they've been invested in it. So
yeah, I think it's cool that she was so interested, given that, I mean, we don't know if this conversation's being had about doing more. Presumably, your gut tells you that's where they would go if they were ever going to do it. And would Emilia Clarke want to do more television? She's part of Secret Invasion for Marvel on Disney+. So
yeah,
quite potentially she wouldn't be averse to that. And I don't think I don't think snobbishness is quite the right word, but you know what I'm getting at. You know how it used to be. I'm a movie actor. I don't do television. I think that's gone now.
Oh, so, yeah, totally.
So I think it'd be quite interesting to think of conversations being had. Maybe the actors are just being primed. Well, we haven't pushed a button on anything yet and nothing's in process, but you know, maybe, you know, they've got to seed these things. If she gets herself into another Game of Thrones for 10 years, you ain't going to be seeing Qi'ra, you know, so yeah, got to think of these things. But yeah, just thought it was cool that she was genuinely, or appeared to be genuinely, stoked about the character making a comeback in War of the Bounty Hunters. And of course, we'll be reviewing that on the site very soon, and you know, follow the reviews on Fantha. Links in the show notes.
So do you think that she could make an appearance in the Lando series?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's the one of the shows that's kind of almost been forgotten, isn't it? The Lando one. I think all the other shows get spoken about very regularly, but Lando barely gets it. I almost forgotten that they even announced it, and there is a logo out there, isn't it? I think they used the same logo as the comic run from a few years ago. It depends on when they set it and if they still use Donald Glover, which I sincerely hope they would. Yeah, I mean, there was history between those two, wasn't there? You know, they knew each other, so even if they skewed it younger and recast again, Qi'ra as a character could quite conceivably turn up. We had Fennec Shand turn up a couple of weeks before in Bad Batch from The Mandalorian, and so there's a lot of characters sort of tying in now to these storylines. And of course, we've had this for years, you know, how big is the galaxy? You could travel 20 miles down the road. If you bumped into your next door neighbour, you'd be shocked. These guys are travelling light year after light year down hyperspace lanes and bump into people they know and don't seem that shocked. So how many people are actually travelling around the galaxy? You know what I mean? It makes you wonder how many people just never leave their homes and how many people travel. And is it actually quite a small amount of people? So the odds of going to places where there's people you know are probably higher than you'd think. But nevertheless, I think to see Qi'ra do more, given where we left her at the end of Solo, 3 years ago now, scary.
Yeah.
Feels like, yeah, there's definitely a character to be mined there. There's definitely stories to be told. We saw each other on Leicester Square after the screening, didn't we? And you know, bouncing around doing videos on, which are still up on Fantha Tracks TV.
God,
just how much fun it was, you know, and what a joyride that film really was. It's not been. I'll use a Blues Brothers phrase. They've not exploited it enough. There's totally more stories to tell.
Hi, this is John Morton from The Empire Strikes Back, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Well-deserved star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame coming up. Jimmy Smits will receive his later on in the summer. His star will be situated at 6100 Hollywood Boulevard, which apparently is near Gower Street, and it will be the 2,696th since the completion of the Walk of Fame back in 1961, when they laid down 1,558 stars. I did that all from memory. We know Jimmy as Bail Organa from Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, Rogue One most recently, hopefully in Andor. But he's done plenty of other stuff. NYPD Blue, LA Law,
Sons of Anarchy,
Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Dexter, all sorts of stuff. He's a very familiar face. Good to see, isn't it? Good to see a proper star get his own star.
Absolutely. I think it's great to see that kind of recognition, and hopefully we'll see more Star Wars actors get their star on the Walk of Fame at some point over the coming years.
Well, that's a great point, because if you remember when Carrie passed away in 2016, which of course in December is 5 years, the rule, and I may be misquoting this or misremembering it, but my understanding is that somebody has to have been gone for 5 years before they can have a star on the Walk of Fame. If they're not alive, there must be that 5 year gap. At the end of this year, that 5 years is up. So fingers crossed that honour may land at Carrie's doorstep and she gets her star, which is definitely long overdue.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So we've got filming starting this week on Indiana Jones 5, reports say, and Harrison Ford is definitely in the UK. He visited the headquarters of Bremont Watches in Henley-on-Thames. He went to their headquarters, which is called The Wing. And the quote on their Instagram feed was basically he was there for flying, watches, and fine whiskey. And Mr. Cameron, who is from the whiskey part of the world, way up north in Scotland, told me, and I'm going to butcher this word, told me that Harrison Ford's favourite tipple is, I'm reading it, so I want to get it right, Brookladish Valinch. I've killed that word. It's just whiskey to me.
That's fine. I would probably have murdered it as well.
I really should have got Brian on to do a soundbite for this. Brookladish Valley. I'm sure Harrison Ford can say it every time. Hopefully not when he's flying. But the good news is that he's in the country. The buzz is crazy, and people are excited for this. Are you excited for an Indy 5? Do you feel like we need it?
I think so. I think we kind of definitely need some kind of end to the Indy story. I think we didn't really get it with Crystal Skull, and I think there was probably hope that that would be the passing of the torch. And actually, funnily enough, because Brian told me that, and I've basically gone onto their website because I have a twin brother who is quite partial to whiskey, and we've got our 40th coming up. So I thought I'll look at some of these bottles. If it's good enough for Han Solo and Harrison Ford, then it's definitely going to be good enough for my brother, because he normally just drinks the usual kind of stuff you get in the supermarkets. It's fantastic news about Indy, and I can't wait to see that.
I think with Indy 5, I'm excited because it's Harrison Ford, and we want to see Harrison one last time. It frustrates me because I think we should be on like Indiana Jones 10 or 12 by now. It being that sort of serial style film. I think looking back, and I'd love to interview Harrison Ford, but I'd love to catch him in a moment where I could be open enough to say, all the other great work he did, all the other great stories he told, and Lucas as well. He struggled to find that MacGuffin, didn't he? That was always the thing for him. And I don't think Indy, it needs that as part of its construction, but it didn't necessarily need it so overtly. The plot device being the MacGuffin, that chasing the Shankara stones or chasing the Holy Grail or whatever. I think the character and the action was enough sometimes to get him through. I just wonder whether or not you could sort of say to those guys, I bet you wish you'd just done one of these every 4 or 5 years. And we're now on like Indy 12, and this is the last one. You go, look back at the last 40 years of Indiana Jones movies. Look at these 12 great films instead of look at these 5 great films. And the TV series, don't forget. But I'm just hoping that at some juncture in this film, he either passes the hat and whip onto somebody else, or there is some sort of young Indy scenario where Harrison is looking back to days past, and you're just going to have another actor in that role playing a younger version of Indy. It's just got to be done. I don't see why we couldn't do that.
I suppose we've got to remember that if George Lucas is tied up doing 12 Indiana Jones films, then would there be space and time to do any new Star Wars? Would we have gotten the prequels when we did, for instance, or would they have been pushed back? And I suppose that's the thing, because it does seem like with Lucasfilm and George in particular, he does a film and then he kind of pretty much has a break. He's not like some of these other kind of, Michael Bay and some of these other directors who kind of roll from one film to another. It seems to be like, obviously it's a 3-year production period for a Star Wars film, especially when he's kind of writing it, directing it, producing it and everything else. Then I guess you weigh up what's where does indie fit into it? But I completely agree. We could have had more. I think we could have had more films at the beginning of the 21st century. So, the early 2000s. I think, there's a big gap there that we could have easily filled with, a couple of films and that.
I think what would have probably happened, and make a great point, because Lucas was so busy and Star Wars is so intense and so time consuming, and he wasn't just working on films, he was building the company. Spielberg was like crazy busy in that time period as well. Is that what's happened now with Spielberg stepping out of the director's chair and Lucas not being involved at all? I think what would have probably happened was it would have been sort of story by George Lucas and the basic crux of it. Spielberg would have probably stepped onto production duties, or maybe that might have happened earlier. I think now, with it being James Mangold, it feels like a big deal. Well, it's not Spielberg directing, well, he is producing. George ain't involved. George was retired. I was a bit sad at the time, but I'm mostly glad that Spielberg is involved, and I'm really pleased that John Williams is doing the music. But yeah, I think that you've probably got other names involved, directing names, which would have been fun, but I just wish we were looking at like Indy 12 or something by now.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark panthertracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
This Friday saw the release of episode 6 of The Bad Batch, which was entitled Decommissioned, and it picks up at the back end of where episode 5 ended. So, Mark, what was your kind of initial thoughts over this story and how things have progressed in this episode?
Well, I was late getting to see this one because I tend to get up nice and early on a Friday and try and watch it as close to 8 o'clock UK time when it lands as I possibly can, but I was working, so I didn't get to see it till later. So I steered clear of social media, but did see a few mentions of it, all very positive. And I wasn't disappointed. It was really great. One, we're getting more into, we talked about it last week, that whole A-team logic. It started off and it was like, oh, this isn't the A-team. And then over the last couple of issues, it's like, I kind of is going towards that feel. This episode, especially at the end, really intensifies that, these guys are going to, they'll do missions. They've got to pay for stuff. They've got to be pragmatic. They've got to make things work in that sense. But now they're aware of a greater cause, which surprised me that this cause clearly will eventually become a rebellion, is so known at this point. Because the great thing in this episode, and, we had Fennec turn up, and now we've got Rafa and Trace Martez, who we saw in the Clone Wars. They turn up in this episode. They're on a mission. Sid sends them off on a mission. They turn up to do it, and Rafa and Trace are there doing a similar mission, trying to get the same thing. But it's just the whole turnaround of, there's bits of it that were like Toy Story 3. Oh my goodness, I didn't expect that. But then also the fact that at the end of it, Sid has said her bit, and she's quite clever as she phrases things. And at the end, when Hunter has the conversation with one of the sisters, and you realise that there's more at play than what they realise. They're learning week on week about what's going on in this galaxy because they're kind of new to it. What did you think of it?
Starting at the back end, I thought one thing which is almost pretty much an overarching theme for this series is actually, things were a lot easier when they were just soldiers. We're finding out with the fact that there's other people who've got vested interest in the bounties and the items that they're meant to go and acquire. They also have got no real kind of like information network, which is where I think Sid is pretty good in manipulating them, kind of saying, well, look, you're the guys who've got bounties on you. If you want to kind of stay ahead of them and stay under the radar, you're going to kind of need to work for me to A, get the money and the credits, but B, I'll pass on and provide you the information so you can stay ahead of that. So it works great for her because she's suddenly now got this team of crack commandos who can basically go and, in theory, get anything done that they're asked to do. I thought that was really interesting. And I mean, just generally, this episode, it wasn't really anything like new or special. I mean, obviously, again, a bit like with the last episode, there's lots of kind of like callbacks, or you almost feel like it's drawn heavily on Attack of the Clones as inspiration, because it's almost set in a droid foundry location, a very similar kind of color palette, although it looks spectacular in HDR again. Yeah. She's got the head, and now he's got the head, and then now we've got to work together against like a common enemy. It's very easy TV and easy like storytelling. There's nothing kind of new here about it, but I don't think necessarily it needs that, because actually, again, it's like seeing how things develop on a more personal level. So suddenly now we're looking at Omega, who hasn't been told to go back to the ship, but is now basically lookout and is being drawn into the operations. She's got that blaster bow again, which she's now kind of becoming more independent and becoming her own warrior. And then on the other side, we then see the more worrying aspect of like Wrecker and his inhibitor chip either malfunctioning or potentially, in this case, starting to function almost correctly by him starting to repeat the lines that Crosshair said, good soldiers follow orders. If you don't pay attention, you could just go, well, it was a bit of a nothing story and nothing really happened. But actually, I think people forget that we are only 6 episodes into the first season, and we've got another 10 episodes. So I still don't necessarily think this show has found its feet, but I think what we're doing is we're following the galaxy as well. We're following the galaxy's transition from the Clone Wars into that era of the Empire, the height of the Empire. And I think with that, that's where we're going to see the transition of a Bad Batch as well. So they may or may not stay with Sid. We might see them for another episode and then they might move on. I suppose it depends upon how beneficial that relationship is.
It's interesting you say that about staying with Sid, and also Omega as well, because they've got to be careful that they don't give any kind of similarity in terms of style and substance and vibe to a show like The Mandalorian, because they're set so far apart. But there are characters that are around in both eras. Obviously Fennec's the big one. But already with this one, Omega, she's such a likeable character. You made a great point that, they don't send her back to the ship in this episode. She's there because she proved herself last time. She lets the Rancor out and the whole thing, so she's becoming part of the team now. They go back to Ord Mantell. She's training with the bow, that cool little scene at the beginning. Sid's clearly taken a liking to her. She knows she's smart. She figured out that Sid was the contact last week, and now Sid gives her the, you need to get stronger arms, that whole thing with the arrow. With the Martez sisters, they take, not a shine, but they befriend her to a degree. The nice little scene at the end where they wave each other off, which was kind of cool. But even when, and that was the Toy Story 3 moment, as you say, all the Attack of the Clones stuff, all the iconography from the prequel trilogy, super battle droids and battle droids and the whole thing, and I love that moment of using the tactical droid to turn the droid on droid moment. That was very cool. The fact that they go back to get her out of that situation and use the droid arm to pull her up, that whole sequence. Here you've got the Martyr sisters are one team and Clone Force 99 are the other. And eventually they work together, and you come up with a solution, which is what they did. And then, of course, they lose the head in the battle at the end. But that nice payoff with all the information being on the stick that Tech had downloaded that Hunter gives to one of the sisters at the end, and realising that actually, there's more going on than what you see here. Characters are building, the galaxy is evolving around them. Everything is new to them, isn't it? Like you say, it's much easier being in the army.
It is, exactly. And I do actually appreciate how it's quite a clever kind of story point when they've kind of gone, well, actually, this tactical droid has been gathering all this information about how the clones fight and operate. But now, obviously, we're clones of the Empire. And then suddenly there's people who are really interested in that information because clearly at the moment it's still clones who are the army of the Empire. So you can see how that's kind of really beneficial, and it's a really nice juxtaposition compared to the Clone Wars and stuff like that. I thought that was a really cool touch. I think it's getting there. It was really nice to see the Martez sisters again, because obviously we didn't see them since season 7, Clone Wars, and the last time we saw them, they were getting pally with Ahsoka. So then you start to think, well, who are they working for? Is it Ahsoka? Has she put them in touch with somebody? Is she now already that fulcrum position, and is she now maybe putting them in touch with Bail Organa? And is that who we see at the end in the holo transmission, which we only see a little bit of his kind of tabard again? So it's interesting to see how they've developed as well, and how actually they've managed to kind of retain their own identity, but they're now working for something bigger. Whereas before, back in the Clone Wars, down in level 1313 or whichever one it was, they were very much for themselves, very grifters, kind of doing stuff just to get by and try and kind of get ahead of everybody else. So now that to see them working on something which for a bigger picture again is development from that perspective as well.
Yeah, it would be nice, wouldn't it, like you say, because Ahsoka sort of came to them in need in season 7, and then they all worked together and left. She left, and the sister had built the ship, and I think it was Rafa, wasn't it, got the ship together and got that up and running, so she was investing in that, and it's nice to see the ship again in this episode. A lot of people weren't that keen. I mean, I think the Bad Batch arc was the first batch, and then the Martyr Sisters was the second one, wasn't it?
That's right.
I think a lot of people were a little bit like, a little bit iffy about the Bad Batch arc, which I really enjoyed, partly because it was a hangover from way before, but also because it was just so well played, and clearly they knew they were spinning the Bad Batch off into their own thing.
Yeah.
And now I think you look at, if you went back and watched those Martyr Sister episodes, I think it was 4, wasn't there? Went back and watched those again, you'd probably go, yeah, there was more coming with those characters. I think we even said it when the episodes came out, on the podcast. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw these again. But further than that, with Sid, do you think they'll stay with Sid, or do you think they'll move on? What do you think initially? Do you think she's there as their sort of job pimp for the time being, or do you think they'll move on somewhere else?
I think maybe for the short term they will stay. They go back to Ord Mantell until obviously the situation becomes untenable. Now, we haven't seen anything from Crosshair for a good couple of episodes.
Yeah, true.
My gut feeling is that maybe we'll start to see something in next week's episode, and it's just a feeling, because I think that, again, he is still part of a Bad Batch, and there was all that kind of undertones in the last time we saw him, that actually maybe there might be a way for him to kind of redeem himself, for instance, or something.
They definitely miss him, don't they? You can tell they miss him.
Yeah, because we're still talking about him, like when Wrecker's asked to go up and take the high ground and stuff, and he's like, well, that's what Crosshair did. And I think for such a single one-tone character that he comes across, I think we could possibly see some greater development into either some kind of form of conflict within the batch, because like he's feeling like maybe he's not given his due or something, because he's a tank, isn't he? So he's always the one who goes and does all the heavy stuff and takes all the heat and stuff. So I wonder if there's something going to go on with that, and again with maybe with the inhibitor chip, that it's going to actually take him out of the group for an episode or a couple episodes and see what happens there.
We've got that Bad Batch. We've got the 5 characters, including Crosshair, the characters we knew in the Clone Wars, let's say. And Echo's not part of the Bad Batch. He's brought into the team, but he's not part of the Bad Batch in that sense.
Correct, yeah.
And now Crosshair's out the picture for the time being, and Omega comes in. And now you kind of get the feeling that this situation with Wrecker's only going to get worse. So let's say Wrecker goes out of the situation, and then you're down to 3 really, because Echo's not a Bad Batcher. You know, I'm wondering if this story, is it going to skew more like a Rebels story that was quite positive and left threads? Or do you think this is going to be more like a Rogue One story where we're going to get to the end of the Bad Batch and go, well, Omega's the last one standing? You know, where do you think it's going to go?
Do you know, that's a really good point. I mean, I've always just assumed, and I don't know if it's because it's animation, that they would find a way to either rescue or bring back Crosshair. Their story isn't totally sewn up by the end of whatever season is going to be the last one. And I guess in some respects, why would it be? Because you've then basically got 5 potential characters you could then use in properties later down the line, and potentially something, you know, one of the characters just pop up in a live action. But at the same time, there's something about Omega. I can't quite put my finger on. The scuttlebutt on the net is that I think a lot of people think that she might be force sensitive, and this kind of plays into the, you know, this potential idea that maybe she was meant to be like an early proto Palpatine clone. That's where she was kind of grown and developed for that. I was trying to picture Omega and Palpatine together, and actually I think that Omega doesn't look that dissimilar from a really young Palpatine. I mean, the features are a little bit softer because she's female, but I was like, I wonder if actually, there is some kind of Palpatine with her, and then potentially there is a force sensitivity about her. And now, how does that then affect the clones? And how does that then affect potentially her future going forward? You know, is this something that she then kind of, you know, gets captured and becomes an Inquisitor or something? Or maybe Wrecker then, his chip kind of flips and then he identifies her as a Jedi, so then he tries to take her out. I mean, there's quite a few kind of like different avenues that we could get down with this. And I think for those people who are kind of saying that we've had nothing but like 3 or 4 episodes of filler and stuff like that, I think the series is still too early to really get a complete grasp and handle over what this series is actually going to develop into, because I think it could be many things, and maybe actually it changes as the galaxy changes. We find them having to kind of like alter their approach and maybe their allegiances depending on where they are.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zebralios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the force be with you.
On Twitter this week, I put out a little plea, a little call, asking for questions to be sent in for the podcast. And we had a bunch of questions coming for the podcast. So we've got questions for the next few episodes. And thank you to everybody that sent them in. But I've picked 2. So they're from 2 different people, from Alan J. Wills, at Alan J. Wills on Twitter, and Ross Hollabon, who occasionally writes reviews on Fantha, also at Ross Hollabon. From Alan, first question. Hi, Mark. I have a question for your Making Tracks postbag. There have been quite a few character cameos in the Bad Batch so far. Who else do you think might turn up in the series? Keep up the good work. So let's kick off with that, Mark. And thank you, Alan, for the kind words. We've had Fennec. We've had Cutler Quain. We've now had the Martez sisters in just 6 episodes. And Tarkin, of course. Who else do you think might turn up? What other faces would you anticipate seeing in this era?
Well, possibly Bail Organa, Ahsoka, And I'm going to say it, either K2SO or Andor, because I think there's going to be some kind of tie-in to the Andor series. We're in such an interesting era that they could introduce loads of people. You know, we could even see somehow a really young Princess Leia. Could you imagine? That'd be really interesting. Princess Leia and Omega and all that. That'd be interesting. I mean, obviously at the time, Leia is going to only be like 6 months or a year old or something. Yeah. But you know, she's not the one in hiding. So she's the one who's in the public domain and that. So we could possibly see her. Potentially, I guess, as a Boba Fett opportunity. And again, every single bounty hunter that you could possibly imagine, Bosk, IG-88, I think they could quite easily make an appearance. And as we talked about earlier, Qi'ra, or even Lando or Han Solo, we're kind of that fringy kind of area where you think, well, actually, there's a lot of potential because there's quite a lot of characters that will come in slightly later on into the Star Wars timeline.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those characters would be kids, but that doesn't matter. No. You know, they could play into it
because of the fact, like, you know, you've got Omega as a kid. Yeah. We're on Corellia this episode, and we didn't really get to see much more of Corellia than we did really in Solo. No. But there's a whole planet out there, so you could think, well, actually, that'd be quite cool. We could see maybe a real young grifter type Han Solo and Omega.
That would be fun. I got to say, when I learned that we were going down to Corellia, very welcome, because it's a classic Star Wars world that we've never really seen much of. You know, it was neat to see the opening sequence because it was so evocative of Solo. I did kind of expect to see somehow Lady Proxima and some of the White Worms and that aspect of Corellia, but we didn't. It doesn't mean we won't in the future, but I thought we might do at this point. Emperor's obviously going to be in there. Vader, I would imagine, is going to be in there.
Yeah.
Your rebel hierarchy, you know, Mon Mothma. We saw Bib Fortuna, of course, Bib Fortuna last week. That's another returning character.
True. Yeah.
Bail Organa, I totally agree with Bail Organa. General Dodonna, all a bit younger, of course, you know, than we saw them. I think there's some great options. I think the underworld feels like it's becoming the focus, but because we're watching so much world building, I do think, like you say, I think maybe the level that the Bad Batch are working at, and the fact that Palpatine doesn't want to use clones. It's the Kaminoans want the Bad Batch back for their own purposes, not necessarily the Empire wants them back. You kind of got the impression that Tarkin was there to decommission Kamino. The Kaminoans are like, oh, we're going to go out of business here. We need to think of something else. They're our property and we need them back. So they're obviously thinking ulterior motives. What that is, we don't quite know. I'd like to see Jabba. Feels like he's a character that we should be seeing more of at this time, 20 years before, 19 years before A New Hope. You know, he's built his power base is there. Wouldn't surprise me if we saw, like we did in the Clone Wars, more Fellines like we did last week, but why not bring Shizor into it? You know, there's other options, because I think, like with Crimson Dawn in Solo, Black Sun from Shadows, these criminal organisations, we saw more of it in the sequel trilogy, really, didn't we? You know,
exactly.
Kanji clubs turned up in the Bounty Hunters comic, if I remember. They're just called Kanji. Right. It's the Kanji huts, isn't it? So there's all that aspect. I think they could build up the underworld as well. So I think there's lots of potential, loads of potential. And spinning off that point, the second question, which was from Ross Hollabon, are the Martez sisters primed for a live-action appearance in an upcoming Disney Plus show? What do you think? They do feel like they're being fleshed out, don't they?
Yeah, they do feel like that. You could, again, see them in Andor, maybe, or Kenobi. If they're focusing on fleshing the characters out in this kind of timeline, then you probably don't want to just chuck them into the Book of Boba Fett or Mandalorian Season 3, because there'll be quite a bigger age difference.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, what age would you guess the sisters are at this point? My head tells me sort of late teens.
Yeah, I probably would have said, early 20s. Yeah. They're good characters, and I like their banter, and I liked that whole... is there an echo? Is there an echo in here?
Yeah.
I'm sure somebody was been aching to kind of like get that line in somewhere, you know. So they've got good patter. They've got good patter and they've got good energy, I think. And again, you know, if they turn out to be proto rebels, as it were, if they are working for either or for Ahsoka and with or for Bail Organa, then you could easily see them as Commander Rafa or something like that in Andor.
It feels that Ahsoka had a good influence on them. Took time. One system was a bit more optimistic, half glass full than the other, and Ahsoka's influence on them was a positive one, we'd like to think, and they've left that hanging with that final sequence, that final scene with the hologram, because it could be anyone. It really could be anyone. You know, male or female. It could be either. They could be speaking to Bib Fortuna, they could be speaking to Mon Mothma, they could be speaking to Bail Organa. They've left it very open. Or Ahsoka. It could be anyone. Scarif was that first big major victory, and the squad, the Rogue One squad, didn't make it out, did they? It was a do or die mission. But there will have been other victories in the sort of near 2 decades leading up to Scarif, and then Yavin very close after. I just wonder whether or not you could work it so that the Martes sisters become a part of a rebel cell, because they don't coalesce until sort of rebels as a rebellion.
No.
They're still rebel cells with a small r, and then they become a rebellion with a capital R. That's quite late on in the lead up to Scarif and Yavin. So I think at this point there's lots of scattered cells, and I think the Martes sisters could become part of a cell. And I think it'll be quite interesting to learn that these cells have been around probably a lot longer than we think, before they became a unified thing. And at some point, Bail Organa or Mon Mothma or one of the other higher-ups goes, there's loads of these cells around the galaxy, maybe we should start thinking about pulling this together. It's got to be all on the down low. But, the Martes sisters have got their own ship, cells that have got their own capabilities. My head's telling me that they could come into that. In terms of a live-action appearance, it would have to be what you said. It would have to be Andor or Kenobi. And I think Kenobi's feels to me, I don't know, but it feels like it's going to be mostly Tatooine focused. So I don't see why those characters who live on 1313 on Coruscant would have anything to do with Tatooine. And Andor, he's the focal character moving around, bringing these cells together. So if you're going to pitch a show that they're likely to turn up in out of the two, your head would tell you it would be Andor.
That's actually quite logical, really, when you take a step back. With Andor, because that's what's slated to be more of an ongoing, and there's more episodes. They could just be in a single episode. This could be like a single episode kind of appearance. We forget quite easily, I think, the impact, maybe the influence that maybe somebody like Saw Gerrera has. You wonder, actually, is Saw Gerrera now going around? Obviously, he's fighting his own battles on like Onderon and stuff like that, but now is he going around and setting up these rebel cells, with these more extreme rebel cells to really bring down the infrastructure? There could be a good, argument and some interesting character development to maybe find, but actually Rafa is more willing to kind of go that little bit extra, be a little bit more extreme maybe, and whereas Trace is more of the empathic one. I can't remember which way around.
I know, I'm the same.
It's really bad. I mean, and it doesn't really help because they weren't really wearing dissimilar clothes in this episode, so you could develop the characters that way as well. They could, one might want to join the rebellion and really plunge everything in, whereas the other one's like, well, actually, hang on, it's better if we work on the fringes and we aid the rebellion, but then we also kind of like, pick up a bit of spice running on the side, because then we're not necessarily tied into it. Generally, we're in this point where no character that we see in one series should probably be discounted for being a potential character in another series. It comes back to the whole question, really, that we kind of, you touched on earlier on. It's actually about, the size of a galaxy and how small this interconnective kind of storytelling could actually make it, which of course has always been a bit of a bugbear with everybody knows everybody, and therefore it feels like a smaller galaxy than it potentially is.
With your major characters, if Han and Luke are off on a mission and they go in their separate ways to do different jobs, you kind of think logically at some point they're going to go, well, I'll call you next week and we'll arrange to meet here or whatever. But if you're a totally disparate character and then you bump into that character again, and you see it, you're already seeing in Bad Batch, they're covering tremendous distances. Ord Mantell to Corellia is a long way, and they're relatively close on the map, but they're doing stuff all around the galaxy. So we're not just talking about different systems or different sectors, we're talking about different regions. They go from the core to the outer rim and back, so they're really getting around. So just in terms of timing, to be in the same place at the same time is so unlikely. But their society's different, and the way that they do things would be different. And so a lot of these things probably are more planned or known, or not every planet's got a thriving industry, underworld, whatever. You'd think there's probably certain planets that they just do their own thing and they're not bothering anybody else. So the amount of worlds that you would conceivably go to, even though there's millions of inhabited planets in the Star Wars galaxy, it's probably only thousands of planets you really go to.
Because you've got some planets which have maybe just got like a small colony because on the outer rim, whereas obviously core planets and planets like Corellia, which have got a heavy industry focus, you can quite conceivably, those would be the kind of central hub.
Yeah.
If you're building ships and you're also decommissioning battle droids and stuff like that, then you're going to do more work, have more work and more people, more industry kind of come through. So that makes kind of sense. It'd be interesting to see how things turn out, but I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it because I thought they were both fantastic characters and fantastically voiced as well. Yes. So it'd be interesting to see how they get around it. I'm not sure if the voice actors who do it also do live action or not, but that doesn't really, I don't think, needs to factor in. Those characters don't really, have such a specific look or kind of tone about them, but you'd have to kind of bring the voice actors from Bad Batch into live action.
Yeah.
It could be a recast.
Yeah, I think one of the sisters is voiced by, and forgive me, I can't remember her name, but she was an actress in Orange is the New Black.
Yeah,
the actress
that's right,
is around about my age. So if you were going to bring the characters in later on down the timeline, sort of a Book of Boba Fett, Mandalorian era, she would be the perfect age to play her own character. Very much like Ming-Na Wen playing Fennec in live action, 30 years before she voices her in animation in the Bad Batch. So maybe there's a similar scenario coming up there, could happen.
Who knows? It could happen. So that's about all we've got time for today. So thank you to Alan and Ross for those questions. And obviously, don't be shy. We might put another call out actually on social media for more questions in a couple of weeks or so. But in the meantime, if you have got any questions or any comments about Bad Batch or anything that we discussed today, and you want to drop us a line, Mark can tell you how you can get in touch.
I can. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit panthertracks.com or check out the free Panther Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. That could be the best one ever. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@panthertracks.com. Like Mark just said, Ross and Alan sent their questions in, but we had a bunch of other questions as well. So we'll get to those over the next couple of weeks, and I will put out a call for more questions on social media because that worked really well. So thank you everybody for sending them in. Comment, like and share on our social media feeds @FantherTracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Panther Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. This week, Good Morning Tatooine came out on Wednesday, midweek. It was a special episode. Should be back to Sundays from next week. So tune in to Good Morning Tatooine live Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube.
Brilliant. Well done, buddy. So yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Enjoy the sun whilst it lasts. Wear some sunscreen if you're outside. Wear a mask. Get vaccinated. And may the force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.
Oh, God.
From your calendar.
Alexa, stop.